Hi there, and welcome everyone to our latest podcast in our Truth series. And today we're bringing on board one of our dearest friends, Karen Sansom, who is a Pilates and movement teacher. And we posed the question with Karen, what are the three most conscious truths that are rising for her at the moment? So welcome, Denny. Welcome, Karen. Let's dive in. Karen, do you want to just maybe give us a little bit of information about yourself, first of all, and who you are, and then we'll dive into these beautiful conversations about truth.
Okay. Hi, Fiona. Hi, Denny. Nice to see you. I suppose I have been a teacher of movement for, more than 25 years now. And have spent a lot of time in my physical body in one form or another. I mean, we all spend time in our physical body, but I spent most of my life actually within that space rather than my head space. And one of my passions that's developed over the years is to help people come back into their own bodies, to trust their own bodies, particularly if they've been in a position of pain or injury or something like that, and they may have lost their connection with their physical body and have learnt to, perhaps distrust it and perhaps listen to stories that have come up about their bodies. So one of the things I love to do is to sort of help people find their way back to connecting with their physical space. So that's one way of putting what I do. And it's sort of based around, Pilates is the majority of the modalities that I use, but I sort of use energetic stuff and other bits and pieces as well with all of that. So I hope that explains it in a little way.
It's beautiful. Thank you. And the physical body is so important at the moment. I think one of the things that we've been learning through this shift that we're going through is how important our physical body is in regards to, it's the container for our soul. And whilst we're, embodying more light whilst in the physical body, it's so important, therefore, to take care of our physical body in the best possible way that we can. So beautiful work that you're doing there. So I guess let's dive in. This question, I mean, truth is such it's in our faces at the moment. We can't avoid truth. It's just around every corner. It's influencing everything that we do. We're feeling pushed into our truth in every moment. And Denny and I were talking about this a few weeks ago, and this question around, what is it that's rising within each of us as truth? Because whilst truth is influencing us all, it's our individual truth that's surfacing more consciously. So let's dive into your first one. What's that?
Well, maybe I've been thinking about this quite a bit. So maybe I'll sort of state what my three truths are, because you asked me to come sort of narrow it down into a couple of statements. And then I think I'll expand on each one, because they all intertwine. There's no way that you can sort of, dissociate one from the other. So the first one that I came to was that there is universal truth and there is personal or human truth. And then the second one is that all of us have our own truth, our own personal truth, and that my truth, even however I view it, is no more or less valuable than anybody else's truth. So we've all got our own unique truth, and they're all an individual journey, and they're just as important as one another. And so just because you don't believe or just because you have a similar truth to someone else doesn't make that any more valuable than someone else that you are completely diametrically opposed to in your truth. So we all bring our own individual truth to make this such a melting pot of experience. And then the last thing that I've been really sitting with is that truth is an ever-evolving process, that if you get fixed in your truth, then it doesn't become a truth, it becomes a story. And so I feel like that truth is always creating itself, evolving. And one of the things that we do as humans, if we're on some sort of a spiritual or self-inquiry path, is that one of the things that we're yearning to do, and part of yearning, if you use that word yearning, is that we want to become more authentic in that truth and actually become closer to our universal truth, if you like, or our essence within that universal truth. So I'm hoping that sort of makes some sort of sense. Coming back to the universal truth, I've been sitting with this because I think that we're all universal truth. The essence of us is universal truth. And as soon as we incarnate into a human body, we get bones and structures and skin and limitations placed around that essence. And so immediately there's a story that starts to get overlaid over our universal truth. And that, sort of distances you or separates you, if you like, from your universal truth. It's still there. It's just that we've got it overlaid with stuff. And then as soon as we're born, then we start taking on the truth of our experience. So as soon as we start to experience stuff as a very small child, we get our experience, so it's almost like you piling Post-it notes all over you. And each of those becomes like a story that gets stuck to you. And some of those have been you've created for yourself from your experience and from your own genetic makeup and your own physical makeup, because that in itself is a constraint on your essence. And also some of those Post-it notes are stuck on you by other people and the expectations of the world around you and all of that sort of stuff. So you end up, even before you've had the capacity to work out what your truth is, you've already got all these Post-it notes all over you from your experience. And then we continue as life goes on. We put another Post-it note on, and we put another Post-it note on. And often it's as a reflection of any sort of experience, be it good, like however we label it, we're good, bad, joyful, not so happy, negative, positive, traumatic, joyful, that sort of stuff. They're all stories, they're all Post-it notes, and they're all some sort of experience. So our truth as a human is made up of all of those Post-it notes. And I suppose our way to become a little bit more authentic in that truth is to work out which of the Post-it notes serve you and which of them don't, because we'll always have story. Human nature is we have story. We can't not have story. And even when you do, a whole lot of spiritual work, you might get to a point where you think, oh, I've got it all figured out. And then you realise, well, that's a story because the journey never continues. The journey never ends. It's about the journey. It's about the path. So, so that's sort of where I've been sitting with all of that. Did you want to fire any questions at me around that? And have I...
Yeah, I can. If we go back to the statement universal truth, I'd love you to define what that means. And I'm going to pose it to you as neutral. Is that a state of neutrality?
I wouldn't call it neutrality, because that's sort of, I don't know, I suppose there's no... Maybe it's a point of balance. Maybe it's just a point of, I don't think we can define it. I think that a human brain can't actually conceive of what universal truth actually is. We can get close to it. We can get glimpses of it when we are fully present. So, like you might be meditating, for example, and you get that moment where you're just in full presence. And then you go, and then you try and hold on to it, which creates the story, and then it's gone again. And so I think the physical structures of our being are such that we can't hold universal truth, if that makes sense. We are universal truth, and so that's the sort of dichotomy of that. but we can't always experience it except if in those moments of presence. So I don't know whether I've answered your question there. It's not, it doesn't, neutral to me sort of feels a bit bland. Do you know what I mean? And I feel universal truth is actually, I don't know what the description would be, but it just sort of that sense of bliss, fulfill, like, or everything all together. I don't know whether I've really answered your question there, Jenny, but
sorry. I'd love to dive in, because my perception of universal truth maybe is different. So I'd love to have a conversation around this, because it might expand my thinking, because I think of universal truth as something that we all live by. It's something that we all know as the truth, in terms of this is the right or the wrong thing, or the truthful thing, or the clear thing to do. And subjective truth, personal truth, may be different to that. So, and of course, subjective truth is our own personal truth. So universal truth for me is the sort of thread, the fabric that runs underneath our experience. And then on top of that, as a layer, is our own subjective truth. So that's the way I've always perceived it.
Can you give me a universal truth, just so that we can separate the difference between a universal truth and a subjective truth, in terms of like a tangible truth?
I think yes, it's a good question. There must be one somewhere that well, the sky is blue.
But see, that's down to
sky
perception.
Isn't blue.
Yeah, that's right. That's down to perception.
And the sky's reflected. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, that's such the interesting thing about truth, right?
And that's what I think about universal truth, is that I think it even goes deeper than I believe. I agree with you that there are common truths that we hold, but they're not necessarily universal truth. There's still constructs of human experience and human behavior. Human experience, we want to love, like there's a common thread through most humans, that we want to be loved. Okay, so I'm going to quote one of the women I've been working a lot with of late. And she has this way of talking, and I don't know where she gets this information from, but she talks about, if we talk about humans come into this world with 4 major fears, if you like. There's fear of annihilation, fear of abandonment and rejection, fear of loss of control, and fear that you don't belong. And so all the stories and all the post-it notes that you put over the top of that are, your personal truth and how you cope with those fears. And the reason that those fears, we come in with those fears, is that we've already got a construction around our essence that limits our essence, because our human mind can't cope with it. And so we can't actually access universal truth or define it, because we're constrained. And I don't know whether that makes sense. To me, universal truth is sort of outside of our understanding. It's like touching divinity and touching the concept of, God, great spaghetti monster, whatever you want to call it, cosmic consciousness, whatever it is. But it's something that we can touch only when we come into pure presence and forget our separation and forget those fears. And that happens very rarely. And so that's why there are, as I said, there are common things that we all want and desire, which is love and belonging and all of those sort of stuff, and how we treat, maybe not how we treat each other, but there's common needs. But I think that they come from separation from universal truth.
Well, I kind of like that concept. It's broadened my awareness. I think if I step into that more fully, I think of universal truth as limitless, and therefore there are no constraints around it, and it's open for interpretation. I can see that view around that. and therefore how we find our own personal truth or our own subjective truth within that, is that piece that I guess we're looking at today, is that, you know, what is our own truth within that universal truth. So that's the piece that I'm interested in with you. What is your truth around this, your personal truth, rather than the universal truth of
Sure. I suppose the idea of, I was talking earlier about yearning, and I've been a seeker, or what I believe is a truth seeker, all my life. And I think Denny and I had this conversation, because I know she talks about herself being a truth seeker as well. And there's this drive within humans, and there's been a drive within me to seek my truth, to seek my authenticity. And that, to me, means that I have gone down pathways that have helped me develop tools to build my awareness, which then helps me dissolve some of the stories. And it's finding the tools that sit right with you to help you see your stories and work out whether that story serves you or whether it doesn't, because we'll always have some sort of story, and that story will evolve and change over time. I also believe that the one thing that I didn't tell you was my third belief around truth is that the physical body, and probably where I work from most, the physical body is a barometer for your truth at any given moment. So all your physical sensations, be they pain, joy, whatever they are your barometer. All your feelings and emotions, because, you know, feelings are feelings. You feel them somewhere in your body. Your emotions are a manifest of what your body's reacting to. And even your thoughts arise from this physical being, and they arise from your you know, limited or your unique experience. So where was I going with that? Went off on a bit of a tangent there. So I think the yearning, humans have a yearning to find their authenticity, to return to that essence of who they are, to return to, you know, being able to touch universal truth. And so the journey that we go on in seeking truth is to try and take away those or dissolve those things that get in the way of that, and get in the way of you being able to see your truth, your essence, if you like. And you can get close, but you'll never actually be able to see it, I think, until we're out of this physical incarnation. You know what I mean? I think the limits of our human body, we'll always have story, and we'll always think, oh, I'm really close now, and there's another story, put another post-it note on. So it's being aware of that, and awareness is such an important tool in all of that, because if you bring awareness to a story or a post-it note or whatever you want to call it, or your experience in the past or your trauma, that goes a long way. Just bringing your attention and your awareness to that story, whatever experience, is a way of dissolving any hold it's got over you, and any limitation that it might have on you, and you can create a spaciousness around it that lets you see that scenario a little bit more objectively, if you like. And therefore that spaciousness, I don't know whether perhaps it lets you see it like an objective observer is a little bit more truthful than being in the subjective story of it.
So if I'm hearing you right, Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, the universal truth is the truth, and everything else is story on top of that, and we're just coming back to universal truth. Is that, I'm just trying to, does that feel true to you?
Yeah, in the scheme of things, yes.
Then can I ask you a on the spot question?
Mm-hmm.
What is one of the stories that you have running right now that you're trying to put some frame around, or trying to
Yeah, well, there's a lot of those. There's one is an ongoing story. Oh, look, I've been a people pleaser my entire life because for whatever reason, my little brain thought that if I pleased people, I wouldn't be rejected and I wouldn't be abandoned, and that's really the fundamental issue of it. And so my pattern for 57 years has been to please people so they don't reject me. And in times, those that pleasing people has certainly not been my own truth. It's been someone else's story. And it's that, when you do the should, or when you do the, if I do this, even though it doesn't feel right in my body, I'll do it so they don't reject me. So it's being able to sort of step yourself back out of that story of rejection and be in a position where you're not actually rejecting yourself anymore as well. So there's a lot of work that happens before you get to that place, I suppose, and it's ongoing and it's continuous, where you start recognizing even deeply entrenched habits that you've got, particularly with your significant other, where you're maybe still allowing that to happen, and then all of a sudden you go, oh dear, I'm doing it again. But being also compassionate with yourself and not bringing judgment into it. So I suppose that's one of the areas where I'm trying to peel off a post-it note and I'm trying to peel off another post-it note, and those post-it notes are sort of layered on one on top of the other, because it's defending that deep fear that we all have. And there's layer upon layer upon layer upon those, like a Sara Lee pastry. We've just got to keep peeling off and going, oh, look, I'm doing it again, and not putting another story on top of it and judging yourself for the process, because then you're just going to build another couple of layers on top of it. So it's just self-inquiry. So to me, the ways of doing that are inner inquiry. That's one of Fiona's beautiful statements. I always love that idea of inner inquiry, that you're asking yourself, you're going in with curiosity to say, what's here right now? And then actually being really honest with yourself about what you find, rather than creating another story about it. And then having some, in my scenario, and I believe in most people's scenarios, some physical means of moving that out of your body, because some of those deep stuff are really stuck like big hard pieces of chewing gum, or whatever. And movement and really feeling what's there, and then allowing it to, bringing awareness to it, and then allowing it to move on through is a very effective, for me anyway, effective transformational tool.
I love the way that you are reflecting that truth is multi-layered, and that, sometimes on this journey for seeking our truth, it's not just one thing, it's multi-layers that we need to work through to find that place of truth within ourselves. And with this, this truth that's rising within you at the moment around the people-pleasing piece, are you able to share anything around the inner inquiry that you've done around that, and where you came to with that or where you're sitting with it now, maybe as your place of truth in this moment?
Well, so there's the last 12 months for me has been quite difficult as far as my 30-year marriage has been going. And I knew that as I said, particularly, when you get into habits of relationship, particularly with someone who you seek their approval or don't want to be rejected by them more than anybody else, so someone who's really close to you, I found that that's the hardest thing. I found that I've been able to let go of, say, peripheral things, friends, work environments where I have to people please, but the nub of it has been right down to my closest, most intimate relationships, and they're your biggest teachers. So I've been sitting in that space, spent as you well know, Fee, about 9 months separated from my husband last year. And even within that, knowing that I was terrified of being rejected and terrified of feeling abandoned, and managed to do that to myself, I knew within myself that my truth was saying I'd made the right decision. And I kept coming back to what my body was saying to me, that you've got to follow what your body is telling you. This feels right, even though it's painful, even though it's awful, even though it destroys everything that you've created. It was the right thing to do. And I stuck with that, and I sat in the deep grief of that, and excuse me for a minute. Yeah, I sat in the deep grief of that, and I sat in my part in all of that, and I self-inquired, and I went in and I went in and I kept asking the question, and I kept coming back to, how does it feel? Does it feel right? And if it didn't feel right, I could reject it as not my truth. And even though it was painful and awful for a really long time, that truth continued to evolve. And fortunately for me, my husband's truth also continued to evolve on a parallel thing. And we then were able to merge later on down the track a different version of that truth. And we were able to talk about those truths in ways that we hadn't ever done before, because I think we've both done an awful lot of self-inquiry. And I'd moved a lot of that too. I used my body as a tool to work through points where I didn't think I could cope with the painfulness of it. And I've been finding, I wanted to share a little bit about finding a particular tool. Like, I've been using Pilates and movement through my body in many, many ways of being able to move that through over the years. But just recently I've started doing a conscious dance practice called 5 Rhythms, which I have found absolutely amazing for just moving stuff through. And it's moving stuff through and absolutely touching the really hard places to go, but in this space of an incredibly beautifully held container of the music, and allowing the truth to arise from your body, which might be, today it's the I really can't be fucked dance, so you do the really can't be fucked dance, or I can't cope with that today, so you do I can't cope with that today, or I'm really angry today, so you do the angry dance. So you work out what is rising in your body, you allow it to arise, and you repeat it. You actually let that movement, let that feeling be expressed as a bodily thing. And it's extraordinary, because it just sort of empties out all of that stuckness and all of that truth, and then allows you to have a little bit more spaciousness around it at the end of the dance. And it's just extraordinary without consciously having to dissect it. It's just your body's processing it. So it's been really powerful.
Beautiful. I've done 5 Rhythms and a few different versions of conscious dance, and yeah, they're beautiful practices. There's no doubt. I mean, I love diving into challenges in a bodily way and moving. I've certainly found that you can move things that talking doesn't do it. Doesn't do it.
Yeah, doesn't go deep enough.
That's beautiful. One thing that you mentioned before about truth that has stuck with me is this idea that truth is changeable. I love that idea. I mean, and I'm assuming that when you say universal truth, that's kind of a steady thing, but then the truths on top of that. I love the idea of truths transforming and moving and being fluid. I think the stuckness of truths is where we kind of come into conflict, both internally and externally.
Well, you think about, if you think about the scenario that's happening in the world at the moment, with our friend COVID, that, there's people on completely polar opposites in their belief systems around that. And people are entirely, it's completely their right to believe whatever they want, but they're arguing their truth to such a degree that they're stuck. And to me, there's, like, if you are so vehement about what you believe that you're not able to even listen to or have the possibility that someone else's truth might actually be, not entirely wrong or not entirely right. And I might not be entirely right or entirely wrong either. So it's coming, and it's, again, one of these classic things, is coming back to the middle, coming back to that point of balance and resting within yourself and saying, what is true for me right now? And if you feel that you have to argue something so strongly, why? Why do you have to defend that so much? That it's more, I have to be right rather than the truth in my mind. It's more this, I need to convince you that I am right. And when our job isn't about convincing other people, our job is, or our relationships are about respecting someone and loving someone and having compassion for someone, even if you're completely opposite, have a completely opposite opinion about something, but being able to respect them for their point of view.
Mm. Yeah. There's a piece there around when you feel you have to defend your truth, that I think is really interesting, and it's something that being a truth seeker as I am, that I've sat with a lot in my life, and that is when I get to that place of having to defend a truth, it no longer is of interest of whether that truth is real or not. What's interesting is, why do I feel the need to express that truth to someone, or need for someone to believe it too? That becomes the interesting piece rather than the truth. What is mine? Why do I feel that urge to fight about it, or to have conflict about it, or to convince someone else of my own truth?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes from perhaps we're not entirely sure of our own truth. We haven't really, the truth is hidden by the need to be accepted, okay, or the need to be right, or
the need to be heard.
Yeah, the need to be heard. All of those things. Yeah. So, and so I think when you feel the point where you can stand back and look at everybody, like one of my great shamanic teachers said to me once, and I've never forgotten this statement. She said, I believe everything and I believe nothing. And to me, and it's like, question everything, experience everything with some sort of curiosity. And so allow yourself to experience someone's completely opposite opinion to yours and go, oh, that's an interesting way of looking at things. Doesn't sit right with me, but obviously it's their truth, And so being able to respect them for that. And so it's I suppose that needing to be heard, maybe you're not so sure of, and I'm finding that I'm less and less needing to be heard as time goes by. There's still, scenarios that I want to be heard, of course, and want to be acknowledged. That's just a human trait. But there's more and more where I just think, I'll just come back to myself and say, well, does this feel right with me? And, I'll respect your opinion to think that way. I'll respect your opinion to think that way. And I might be somewhere in the middle of that. And I don't want to judge anyone for their opinion, and I don't need to shout that from the rooftops either. So because there's this, I suppose there's this sense of, well, this is what's right for me.
And so with that, obviously one of your really strong truths that's been rising at this time has been this piece around finding your truth within your, I guess, the intention behind the people pleasing patterns that you've worked with. Has there been anything else that's that's risen around that? Because often, you know, it can be other things that come up with that that feel really true for you now in this moment.
Okay, so within the people, well, yes, within the people pleasing thing, I realized that I had subjugated my needs. I had, and it's probably something very common to women in general, in that I had been out there pleasing other people, thinking that I had to please everybody else so much that I had subjugated my needs, and in a lot of ways didn't even recognize what my own needs were. So it was coming back to me and saying, what is it that I need? What is my truth? What is the truth of me? What is it that I need as a human to be in my authenticity as much as I can, and what can I do to make sure that I get my needs met? So I've been doing a little bit of work with archetypes, for example, and sitting with all of those, labeling all of those, like some of the archetypes that get in the way, and but that's another conversation. We won't go off on that tangent. But yeah, recognizing my needs and actually finding that is an unmovable thing. It's like coming back to that central rudder of me, going, like the decision I made when I had left my husband, that it was the right thing. Even though it was painful and awful, it was the right thing. And it's what I needed at the time. And it's the same now. I know that I have worked out the things that I inherently need to feel joyful and experience life as fully as I can. And I make time for that. Like I make time. I've created balance in my work life. I have probably more balance now that I'm working less with COVID restrictions, but carved out time for me to do the things that I need, like spend time by myself, spend time in stillness, spend time moving my body, just be with myself, be with other people, those sort of things, just things that make my heart sing. And it took me a while to work out what they were, and I'm still working out what they are. And but that's okay, because that's part of the journey. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very common thing, Karen, is that women not even really knowing what it is that they desire or they wish for, or that they're not receiving, in that looking after everyone else before. Sometimes I think it's just not even something that you can touch upon.
Yes.
Mm.
And I think too that the way, well, patriarchy is another conversation as well, but there's things that we have been, the post-it notes that have been put upon us as women, and that we have, perhaps swallowed as true, because that's just the way, our mothers did things, the way women have done things for centuries, is this undervaluation of things that bring you joy and things that bring you into presence. And we've been in a culture that's been driven by goal orientated. You've got to do this in a linear format, and it's got to be done by X time, and you're not valuable unless you're achieving in that way. And I have really pared that back in myself, and have now just enjoying the and I suppose I'm in a privileged position to be able to do that, and I'm in an age in my life where that's sort of now able to happen as well. I've done all the things on the I should have achieved list in a lot of ways, and now I'm going, well, what is it that now makes me joyful? And it's actually letting things arise organically, letting things doing things that I probably never allowed myself to do because I didn't have time, or I should have been doing something else, and those sort of things. And now I'm going, well, what do I feel like doing today? And a lot of those things are creativity for creativity's sake, and you know, spending a lot more time in nature, and just spending a lot more time just being. And a lot of those are undervalued in our society incredibly. They're devalued as, you know, feminine pursuits and all of this sort of stuff, and they're so soul nourishing. And that's where I've been wanting to spend so much more of my time. And that's one gift that's come out of COVID restrictions, in that it's sort of forced us to go into that state to a certain extent. And so you have permission to spend more and more time in those places that give you joy. And so maybe there's a slowing, maybe there's something really good that will come out of this.
I'm so with you on that. It's definitely been a truth that's arisen for me over the last year or so, is this the reframing of the rise of the feminine being putting joy at the center,
Yes.
putting creation at the center. And that, you know, the vision a few years ago of the rising of the feminine was about, you know, becoming more empowered and having more rights and all of the things that are actually kind of patriarchy things. And the landing of the rise of the feminine just being the state of joy, and having that be the core, the center, was just such a wow moment for me, truth moment for me. That's arisen over the last year. So yeah, it's beautiful. And you know, as humans being creators, you know, we're given this gift of being human and being able to do things that a lot of other species can't. And that idea of creating art or creating what it is you're here to create is such a fundamental joy for us. So the allowing of that state.
And that perception of joy as well, just allowing ourselves to be in a state of joy without it feeling like we're being selfish or, you know, taking time for ourselves. It's part of who we are. We are here to live a life of joy. That's our, you know, that is our purpose, really. And so that is landing very consciously, I think, at the moment for a lot of people. And that question is surfacing, you know, to find your truth around it. What brings you joy? What brings you into a place of joy? And accepting that and honoring that for yourself.
Absolutely.
And I sort of think that brings you back to that concept of universal truth, because, you know, if the reason for this incarnation is to experience everything in a human form, and experience it all with curiosity, surely joy should be at the top of that list. And experiencing everything with joy will bring you back to universal truth. You know, like when you think about amazing feelings of you know, joy being the center, creativity, gratitude, love, compassion, all of those things, they're very expansive sort of emotions, and make you and create spaciousness, and to me bring you into a state of presence, and perhaps bring you, well, not perhaps, but actually bring you closer to your universal truth. You know, it lets you touch that universal truth. Whereas other things where there's stories that contract you a little bit, or contract you a lot. And so one of our objectives, for want of a better word, that's a very patriarchal term, I suppose, but one of the things we seek is to well, there's another little concept that one of the women I've been working with has been talking about too, is that she's talking about the way humans are pain avoiding, pleasure seeking, meaning making creatures. And so we try and avoid pain, we try and move towards things that give us pleasure, and then we try and create some meaning around it all. And it's also standing back and realizing that that in itself is a bit of a story. And even pleasure is a story, but it's a nice story. So isn't that the story that we'd rather rather pursue. And perhaps it allows us a little bit more awareness of our inner essence. So I don't know whether that last couple of comments made any sense. But
yeah, well, there's an interesting couple of things there, because I think that there's joy and then there's experiencing everything, and I'm all about experiencing everything, so whatever arises, then that is what it is, rather than going, I just want to have joy, I just want to be in joy. Joy is something for me that that is a state that arises as opposed to something that I push for. As soon as I'm pushing for it, it feels like I'm avoiding what doesn't bring me joy. If that, just to reframe it.
I think it's the allowing of it all, isn't it? I think the allowing is the key piece there. It's just allowing everything, creating the space for it all.
Yeah, and I think I've got a strange idea around joy, because I feel like joy almost defines the state of the I am presence, the state of I'm okay no matter what's going on. So, whatever gets thrown at you, and it might be pleasant, it might be unpleasant, it might be, traumatic, it might be whatever, that central state of I am presence can almost be described as joy. And I know, because I feel sometimes joy and happiness get interchanged a little bit, and I think happiness is a different scenario. Joy is almost a point where, well, I can be okay. I can be expansive no matter what is happening around me. And I suppose that's a strange definition of joy, but that's sort of sometimes how I see it. And I find that it's quite different to happiness, like happiness is, I'm, all happy. Whereas joy, I can still be joyful in the moments when the shit is hitting the fan and everything's falling around about me. I can still find a moment of joy even in that scenario. I can look out and say, oh, the birds are singing, or, aren't the flowers beautiful just at that moment. And so it's almost like it's joy arising in present moment awareness, regardless of what's going on around you. So
I can relate to that. My most joyful practice is painting, as you probably know. And in the moment of being completely immersed in it, a lot of things can arise. A lot of things go onto my canvas that come out, in emotions and thoughts. And but there's still this underlying, this is something that puts me into a state that feels right and it feels true. And I agree with you, joy and happiness for me are two different things. But I guess it's that feeling of it just feels right, like my body feels right regardless of what's coming up in that moment. It's a point, it's just the best way I can describe it is a point of creation. Like when you're at that point of creation, it feels joyful and right.
And also perhaps it's a point of emptying out. Like, as you said, you were emptying out onto the canvas. Whatever arose, it comes out onto the canvas, good, bad, indifferent, however you label it. And it's what you said before, Fee, that it's allowing space for it all. And I sometimes feel that in dancing as well, in that sometimes I go into a dance going, I feel really good, and then something arises, and something really deep can arise, and I can experience every gamut of emotion, but know that I'm okay in the middle of it. It's almost like the central rudder is the joy barometer. You know what I mean? Like it's or the it'll be fine, and this process is necessary, and this process you can almost observe the process. And not get consumed by the process. It's like, this is just how I'm experiencing this at this moment. And there's a central stability or centeredness in that in some ways I describe as joy.
Yeah, and my reflection on joy is that it's such a bodily sensation. It's such a feeling that really expands your heart in that present moment. And for each person, it may, like I love, Denny, that you reflect it. For you, it's that point of creation, and it comes through your painting. And for you, Karen, it's through the dance, you know, the physical body movement. And I was thinking, oh, what is that for me? And I went straight to holding my granddaughter on my lap and smelling her hair, which is something unfortunately I haven't done for a very long time. But it was, and then I went into, well, what does that mean for me? And I could feel that joy moving through my body. It's a real, you know, visceral sensation, I think, joy, you know, and I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but that certainly feels that place for me. And it's so present in that moment. It's fleeting sometimes, but it's just amazing when you feel it flow through your body in that way.
Yes, when you describe it like that, it just feels like such an opening.
Yeah, that's right. It is. It's, yeah, I feel that too. Yeah. Oh, this has been a beautiful conversation. We've touched on some amazing topics there. And so thank you, Karen, for joining us today and sharing, you know, what's rising for you in this moment. It's beautiful.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely.
It's been fun.
I loved the way that we started with this universal truth, and it feels like joy might be somehow linked.
Well, I think that's been a really big invitation for me to look at what I perceive universal truth as I couldn't even think of anything. And so I thank you for that, because it will give me a reflection to sit with and work it out and go a little bit deeper with it too.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.